Hello and welcome to the OpenOffice Draw Basics tutorial. My name is Mark Neal and I'm a USATF certifier, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you some tools and some features of OpenOffice that you can use to draw your certification maps. So the first item in our outline that I've shown here on the right is downloading and installing OpenOffice. So if you do a Google search, or whatever search you want to do on OpenOffice, you'll see that immediately Apache OpenOffice official download site opens. Click on that, and you can click on Download Full Installation. I'm not going to do that because I already have OpenOffice installed on my machine, but if you go to my website, Measurer Tools page on my website, you can see how to complete the process of downloading and installing OpenOffice. There's instructions there for both the Macintosh and for a Windows PC. So the next item is drawing tools. Let me open up my OpenOffice application. For us to get started, it takes a couple seconds to open up. And the first thing it does is bring up a window where you can open any type of OpenOffice application, presentation, spreadsheet. What we're going to do is for a drawing, sometimes this will appear for you if you already have it open and you've been working the way that you would open up a new drawing, is to go to File, New, Drawing. And that opens up a new file for you. This shows the different pages. For certification maps, we'll only be using one page, so we don't really need to see this window of multiple pages. Do a little resize here to get it out of the way of our outline. So this is a blank sheet that you have for your OpenOffice Draw. First thing we're going to do is look at some drawing tools. One tool that you'll find very useful is the line tool. Down here at the bottom, you'll see a lot of different icons. This is basically a tools ribbon, you might call it, where most of the things that you're going to use to draw a certification map are going to be located down here. Up at the top are properties of the different items, the different objects that you're going to create. What appears up here will be dependent on what object you currently have selected. So we're going to look at a line tool first. You'll use this quite a bit. You click on this icon down here. It looks like a line. Makes sense. And then go up to your drawing to an open area. You hold down the left mouse button and drag to create a line. And when you let up, it will finish your line. So now I can move my mouse around and it doesn't move the line. These symbols at the end are called handles, and that indicates that the object is selected. So if I click outside away from the object, it's unselected. If I click on top of it, it becomes selected. And you can see up here we have different properties for this line. One is the line thickness. That's what this is. So if we give that a 1, it changes that line thickness. And let's actually scroll up a little bit so you'll see that actually happen. If you go up and up and up, line thickness becomes more and more and more. The default in OpenOffice is a line thickness of 0. What that really means is the smallest thickness that can be represented on the current platform. You don't want to use that because when you export to PDF, which you'll eventually be doing, they'll appear very faint and you won't be able to see them very well. So you want, for all of your lines, for all of your objects, you want to use a thickness of at least 0.01. You can change the color of your line. We'll be using black for this. And that's pretty much it for the line tool. You can move your line just by grabbing one of the handles. You can change both ends of it to wherever you want to be. All right, I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard to get rid of that object. And we're going to look next at the multi-segment line tool. This is very useful when you're trying to create something, especially something like a course path, where you just want to show your whole course path with one object. So the way this gets started, very similar to a line. You click and hold the left mouse button, drag, and then let go. But now when you move the mouse, it creates a second line segment of that. And when you click again, it puts a vertice or a corner at that location, and you can continue to click to put vertices or corners at the different locations. When you're done with your line, you want it to complete, just double click in the same spot very quickly, and that ends it. As you can see, it creates handles for the object. Now, this is a good time to look at properties, other properties, how to look at other properties of this object. Everything we create is going to be, I'm going to be calling it an object, depending on, regardless of what it is, a line, multi-line segment, shape. If you see, you have the same properties up here, but there's additional properties that you can look at by right-clicking. Put your mouse over the line, one of the lines, one of the parts of the object, and then give it a right-click, and this menu will appear. So you can look at line, for example. It'll bring up a dialog box that describes, that shows you the different properties. So these are the line properties of the line. And again, you can change the thickness by simply moving up. Now the difference here is that it doesn't immediately show you on the object that line thickness going up, but if you say OK, you can see that it does go up. So there's those properties that you can change. One of the other properties that you can do, or one of the other selections you can do when you right-click on the object, in this case, is to edit the points. Okay, if you say edit points, it changes the handles from an outline, more of an outline of the whole area that it's covering, and then it shows you the vertices as handles. You can grab each of these vertices and you can move them around. So if you create a course path with this multi-line tool, and then you go back and you notice that it doesn't really follow the roads as well as you'd like, you can go back, right-click, do edit points, and then you can select these vertices. One other thing that you can do with this, it pulls up a edit points little menu bar here with icons. This one is an insert with a little green plus is an insert points icon. If you click that and let go, then you can see that it's selected. And if you go back to your line and you put your cursor at a point in between current corner points, click and hold, and then drag, it creates a new vertex for you. So you can do this multiple times. Okay, if all you want to do is move points, you can put your cursor on an existing one. If you want to create a new point, you can click in between them. Now to get rid of points, you can put your cursor over a point, right-click, and then move down to cut. And cut means delete, basically. It doesn't quite mean that. I'll explain that a little bit later, but it will get rid of that point for you. So that's how you get rid of points, by right-clicking and cutting. Okay, I'm going to hit the delete again to get rid of this multi-line that I just created. And I'm going to talk about the arrow tool. That one's right down here. Click on it. You create this the same way you create a line. Click, hold, drag, let go, and there's your arrow. Now if we right-click on that and select line, we get the same dialog box that we got for just the line tool. So we can change the thickness, it'd be a little thicker. But then the other thing that you have on this, so you also have this with the line tool, it's the same thing, but you can see that it says arrow styles. One of these, the left column, says none. This is the beginning point of your line. So we don't have an arrow at the beginning point of our line. At the end point of our line, we do have an arrow, this particular type. You can use all kinds of different types. And then down here is the sides of that arrowhead. This is very useful when you're creating a map, because oftentimes you'll want to make this smaller so that you can use a more precise pointing with your arrowhead. You don't want it to be as big as the default. So if you just click here, you can make that arrowhead quite small, and then when you say OK, you see the arrowhead gets smaller. Okay, so that's pretty much it for arrow. I'm going to hit the delete to get rid of that. Shape tools. Mostly you'll use these when you're creating your detailed maps of the start-finish and turnarounds to represent buildings, maybe for a rectangle. Maybe you represent a lamppost or a fire hydrant with the circle tool, something like that. So if we select this object and we look up here at the properties, this is the outline. The default right now for me is set to gray, so I'll change that to black, and you can see that the outline of it changed to black. I change the thickness a little bit. Don't want it to be 0.00. And then the color, we can make white. So they give you a whole list of colors here. We'll make that white. We'll do the same thing with this one. Make that white. And this one has a gray outline. Let's make that black. So there's lots of different objects, or different shapes. Rectangle, or they call it ellipse. You also can make a circle out of that. There's a bunch of different other shapes here. I don't know how many of these you would actually be using. But for some of these shapes, when you create them, you'll see another type of handle, which is these yellow ones or green ones. And if you click and select on those, they do different things depending on the type of shape. For this one, it changes the amount of that circle that actually shows up, and you can do it on both sides. So I just wanted you to be aware that sometimes you'll see these yellow handles and they behave a little bit differently than the corner handles, which just change the size of the object. And I should have mentioned that when you do change the size of an object, let's say that we change the size of our rectangle. If you do it on a middle one, it just changes that one dimension like that. If you do it on the middle one, it changes that one dimension like that. If you grab the corner, it will change both dimensions as freely as you want to. Here's a trick though. If you have the rectangle in the right proportion that you want, if you hold down the Shift key and click on the corner vertice and move it, it will change regardless of where you move the mouse. It will always change that height and width proportionally. So it keeps the same proportions, just makes it bigger or smaller. And that's true for all shapes. So if you have something that you've gotten to be a circle and you grab the corner while holding the Shift, it'll make that circle bigger and it won't turn it into an ellipse. It'll keep it as a circle. All right, I think that's good for shapes. Text tool. That is this icon down here, the little T. You can see that if you hover over it, it'll tell you it's the text. Click on it. Okay, now it's selected. And then move to an empty spot on your drawing. Okay, click and hold to drag a rectangle. And then it'll put a cursor, a blinking cursor there, and it's ready for you to start typing text. So I'm going to type a little text. Okay, now this text is also an object. Okay, you can change the size of the text box. That doesn't really have any effect in my case. But if you make it shorter than what the text is requires, then it will go to a new line in the text box. So keep that in mind. And then you can make it as small as you want as far as vertical goes. And then you have a nice size text there. Okay, so there's two ways to select text. One is that you can create the outline. I grab the outline as shown here. And then if you change you can see now this says none. This is the type of outline. So right now it's saying that there's no outline. You can change that to a line, and then you can see that it creates a text box with a line around it. I don't know how often you'd want to do that, but you might want to. The other way to select text is to actually click inside the actual text. You can click at the end of the text and then hold the mouse button and drag over it to select all the text. And then you can see that the properties changed. The property items up here changed. So you can change the text to bold. You can underline the text. You can change the size of the text, which is very important and useful in our map making, because oftentimes we'll want the text to be quite small to be able to fit everything on the map. So now we've changed it to 12. You'll need to hit a return for it to actually happen when you change the text size. You can change the font type as well. There's lots of different fonts available. But I think that's pretty much it on text. When you click a second time, you actually get a different kind of handle, which is a rotation handle, and I will cover that later. So we're going to delete that again, and we're going to move on to our next topic, which is keyboard shortcuts. All right, so to show you what we're going to do with keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to create a shape tool. It's selected. If we go up to Edit, there's some items up here, cut, copy, and paste. Okay, if we copy, it copies whatever you have selected into what's called the clipboard. So it's available now for further use. So now, if we go back to edit and we say paste, it actually created a second rectangle, okay, rectangular shape. And if I click and drag that, you can see that there's a second rectangular shape. So that's a copy first, select first, a copy, and then a paste, and it'll create a copy of whatever it was you had selected when you hit copy and paste. Now, the keyboard shortcut part of this is that we have this selected. Rather than going up here to the menu and saying copy, there's actually a keyboard shortcut for this. That is, on the Macintosh, it's the Command key and then a C. Okay? For the paste, it's a Command key and a V. For the PC, Windows PC, it's a Control C, Control V. All right, so let's go back to here, and I have selected this object. Now, I'm just going to, on the keyboard, I'm just going to hit Control C, and if you watch up at the top, you'll see a little flash of the edit. That means that it did the command. So now I've copied it, and then if I paste, Control V, I'm just hitting Command V on my Macintosh. You saw that little flash, and it's created another copy. This is especially useful when you're creating a map and you have like a line, and then you need lots of lines to create your roads. You can just hit Control C or Command C for copy, and then you can hit Command V multiple times, and then you have multiple copies of that line. You don't have to keep going down and clicking the line icon and creating lines. And then, of course, when you have all of these, you can take each one and you can drag the corners to wherever you want, or click in the middle and drag the whole line to wherever you want. Okay, there's lots of different keyboard shortcuts. The most useful ones for you, I think, will be cut, copy, paste, and undo, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I mentioned that I was going to tell you what cut does. Cut is the same as copy, except that it actually removes the selected object, but it pastes it to the clipboard. So then if you go to Edit, Paste, there's the object once again. So the only difference between cut and copy is that cut removes the current copy of the object, and copy just copies the current copy of the object. All right, so I'm going to delete all of these objects. And the way I'm going to do that, I clicked and held my left click and created a rectangle, and you can select all of the current objects. They'll all get selected. Now I'm going to hit delete, and they all go away. Next topic we're going to talk about is grouping. I probably should have just left those objects up there since we're going to talk about grouping, but I can create several different objects. I can even create a text object. Text. Okay, now, whoops, oh, that actually created a text on the line, and we don't want that. We want a separate line, and then if you unclick the line and then click on the text object, it will create an independent text object, which is what we want to do most of the time. So now if we select all of these objects by drawing that rectangle, we can group these objects. That's under the Modify menu item at the top, and Group. Or a way that you'll probably more likely do it is put your hand over one of the cursor over one of the objects. You'll see a hand icon or cursor appear, and then if you right click, you'll get different objects, and if you have different menu items. And if you have multiple objects selected at the same time, Group will be one of the things that you have available. So if we say Group after all three of these have been selected, then what it does is it does exactly what it says. It groups these three objects into a single object. Okay. So then if you click on one of them or on any one of them, then and click and hold, then you can move the objects. Okay. And if you do it a second time, it'll actually show you the objects as they're moving. It'll show a ghost image as they're moving. But they all three move together in this case. This is very useful when you're trying to. One example where it's very useful is when you're creating a detailed map of a start or a finish, and so you want to select all of the objects in that little drawing you have, and you group them together, and then maybe you're going to move it to a different location on your main map. So grouping is a very useful tool to know and understand. Once it's grouped, if you hover over it and right-click, you can also ungroup those objects so that they will be independent objects again, and they'll move independently. All right, I'm going to select two of these objects and get rid of them. Oop, didn't select the text. There we go. So now we just have one object, and I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is rotating objects. So this is where those other types of handles come in. You saw the red circle handles. Another way to invoke a rotation of an object is that you select the object and you go down to this circle-looking icon down here. You select it, and then you see the handles change on this object. So you see two different types of symbols that appear on the object. Now, one are the red handles, and if you grab one of those on the corner, then click and hold and then drag, it will rotate that object, okay, as you can see. The ones on the side do something different. They kind of shear the object. I don't think there's a whole lot of use for that. So mostly you'll be looking at the corners, grabbing, and then rotating. Now, one thing that you should be aware that you wouldn't understand unless you were told about it, so it's good to know, is that once these red handles appear, if you select the objects where you see the hand cursor appear, then you click and hold and then move the object, one thing that you'll notice is that this other symbol didn't move. It was only the object that moved. This other symbol is the center of rotation. That's the point about which this object is going to rotate. So if you were to drag the object like I just did, and then you were to try to rotate it, it's not going to rotate about its own center. It's going to rotate about that point that is the center of rotation. Okay. The way to get that center of rotation back, maybe where you want it, which is the center of the object, is unclick the object, click it again, and then, as you've seen, another way to invoke the rotation handles is to click on the object after it's already selected, and that creates the rotation handles. You see that the center of rotation is back at the center of the object. So now it will rotate about the center of the object. Okay, you can also do this with text. I'm going to create a text object, and this is maybe the most useful purpose or use of rotation is for text, because you're going to be doing a lot of putting road names on roads, and of course those roads are not all horizontal, so it's best to have the road name in the same orientation as the road. So you can grab that text and then you can rotate the text as well. Okay, rotate also works. I'm going to shift and hold. That's another way to select multiple objects, is to select one object, and then as you hold down the shift key, select another object, and then they'll both stay selected. So I'm going to hover over it, I'm going to group it, and then rotation works with groups too. So if you have it grouped, then you're rotating the whole group. Okay, you can translate the whole group, you can rotate the whole group. All right, so I think that's it for rotation. I'm going to delete those objects, and now I'm going to create some objects to explain arranging objects. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to create a long object like that, because this helps in explaining arranging objects. This icon down here is called arrange, and there's multiple items in this object. None of them are active right now because we don't have an object selected. But you'll notice when I created those objects, there's a hierarchy of these objects. Okay, the first one I created, you can see, is now what we call on the bottom. Every object I created after that is on top of it, so it masks it. So I created this one first, I created this one second, created this one third, and I created this one fourth. You can see the one that I created fourth covers up a little bit of all of the other three. So it's on top currently. Now let's take that first one that I created, which is currently on the bottom. If you go to arrange, as I mentioned, there's lots of different options here. Okay, one of those options is bring to front. If you select that object and say bring to front, it's now in front of all the other objects. Okay? Another one is this one, send to back. So now it's behind all of the other objects. Another possibility is bring forward, and bring forward means bring forward one level. Okay, so there's currently 4 levels of objects, okay, because we created 4 different objects. So if we bring it forward one level, it will move in front of that second object I created, but it stays behind the other 2. If I click on it again, you can't really see it, but it's now moved ahead of the second object you created and the third object I created. And now if we click on it a 4th time, it's put in front of the 4th object I created. So this is very useful to be able to move objects back and forth in the hierarchy so that objects cover up each other the way that you want them to cover up each other. Okay, one other possibility here, and I don't really use this very much, but if you select an object and you say in front of object and click on it, it doesn't appear that anything has happened. But what actually has happened is that it's waiting for you to select another object. So you select your first object, say, and then select in front of, and then select a second object. It's saying move that first object in front of this object. So that's what happens. It now covers up the second object. So like I said, I don't really use that very often, but now you know what that tool, that option does in case you ever did want to use it. So I'm going to select all of those and delete them to move on to the next topic, which is zooming. This is pretty simple, but very useful in map making, because sometimes you create, say, for a fire hydrant that you're using as a permanent landmark, a very small object on your map, and then you need to move it. But what you'll notice is that when you scroll over it, hover over it, you get icon. You can't get that hand icon. Okay, that you can see that means I'm going to move the corner. It's going to resize it. That one means it's going to make it wider, not taller. But anyway, you can't get the hand icon to appear. So the way to make the hand icon appear so that you can move it is to zoom in on the object. So that's what this menu item is down here. This is the plus, makes things bigger. This is the minus, makes things smaller. So if you continue to click on that, you can see that it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then these scroll bars at the bottom actually move your drawing from side to side and up to down. Okay, so you can, as you're zooming, it may go away from the center of the object you're looking to select. But now when we put our cursor over this object, we do see the hand, and if we click and hold and drag, the object will actually move, and we're able to get that hand icon in order to move it. So the zooming is very useful. If you're ever getting frustrated with trying to work in something very small, just keep in mind that the easy thing to do is to make everything bigger by zooming in, and then it's much easier to select things and do what you need to do as far as fine work on maybe a small region of your map. So I'm going to delete that since we're done with zooming. I'm going to move to undo, which is another very useful thing to know about. And I'm going to create a couple of objects here to explain this. Let's create a multi-tool as well, or a multi-line, I'm sorry. Double click to end that. Okay, so let's say you have a very complicated drawing where you have, say, a detailed map of a start or a finish, and you want to group all of the objects in that start, in that detailed description of the start, say. So what I do is I create a rectangle around all of the objects, okay? And then I'm going to group them. Well, as I mentioned, some of those detailed drawings, there's lots of objects, and sometimes it's difficult to just select the ones you want without selecting others, but you still want to make sure you selected all of the objects that you want to select. Well, what you can do is try to select all of the objects, but let's say you miss one. Let's say you don't have that object selected. Sometimes you can't really tell whether the object is selected or not because the objects appear in the same space, and it won't show all the handles of every object in that case. One thing that you can do after you select, rather than group right away, you can select one of the objects and drag it, okay, and then let go. And you can now see that one of your objects doesn't go with it, so it means it was not selected when you did that grouping. So what you can do is go to Edit, Undo Move Two Objects, and they go back to where they were. So in this way, you can kind of test things. You can see, did I really grab all of the objects I wanted? You can just drag them away from that spot and see if everything moves. And if it doesn't, it's easy to fix. You just go to Undo and it moves it back. So you'll find that there's lots of, you just have to be aware that this undo exists. And it makes you not be afraid to try things, because if it doesn't work the way you wanted, you can just immediately hit undo and it'll go back to the way it was before you did that. There's multiple levels of undo. It remembers several commands. So if you do 2 or 3 commands and realize that's not what you want to do, you can go up to undo and do it 3 times, and it'll go back to whatever it was, undoing your last 3 actions. Undo also has a keyboard shortcut, Control-Z or Command-Z. All right, let's move on to layers now. This is our last topic. So layers, I don't think you're going to be using this very much in the beginning. Tend to really stick with a one-layer drawings, but it is good to understand the concept, even if you're not really using them, because you can get very confused with layers if you don't understand what's going on with them. So layers are shown down here in these tabs. The controls layer and the dimension layers you can just forget about. The default layer they call layout, but you can create additional layers, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over, hover over a current layer, and I'm going to right click, and then you get a couple of different options here. Say insert layer. It brings up a dialog box where we're going to name our layer. I'm going to call it my layer and say OK. And see now it's created a new tab. Okay. Now, whichever tab is selected, I see I'm selecting the different tabs. Whichever tab is selected, that's called the active layer. And any object you create now will be put in that active layer. The thing that you have to realize is that every object we've created so far, every object you created in your drawing belongs to one and only one layer. So since the layout was the one selected during all of this that we've been doing so far, these 3 objects are in the layout layer. Okay, there's nothing in the my layer right now, but I'm going to change that. I'm going to put a circle, so that's in my layer now. Okay, now if I go back to layout, make layout the active layer, I right click again and say modify layer, it brings up the dialog box for that layout layer. You can see there's 3 checkboxes here. We'll start at the bottom with locked. Okay, if I click on locked, that means that nothing can be changed about this layer. Okay, so I'm going to say OK now with the locked selected. And now if I try to click on one of these objects that are in that layer, you can see that none of them get selected. If I try to create a rectangle around, still none get selected. If I create a bigger layer, you can see that this object does get selected because it's not in the layout layer. It's in my layer, which is not locked. By default, when you create a layer, they're not locked. So that's the locked and unlocked attribute of a layer. Another attribute of the layer is visible. Okay. So if you unclick the visible checkbox and say OK, the objects disappear. They're still there, they're just invisible. They don't show up. You can bring them back by modifying layer and saying visible. Click on that and say OK, and there they are again. All right, so just a couple things to remember about layers. I should mention printable. What printable means is exactly what it says. If it's unselected and you print this file, those objects, even though they're visible, they won't appear when you print. Okay. Also is true if this is unselected and you export to PDF, which we will be doing when we create a map, they won't be exported to the PDF file. So pretty much you just want that printable selected. Now, in order to print or in order to be exported, both printable and visible have to be unselected for them. I'm sorry, both of them have to be selected for it to print. If either of them are not selected, then it won't be exported to the file. All right, so I'm going to cancel that out. And I think that pretty much covers it for layers. And that pretty much ends this OpenOffice Draw Basics tutorial. I would suggest that you move on to the tutorial to create a simple map next. That's also on my Measure Tools website page.